I was 14 when they told me I was a mistake. Asterisk, it was raining outside. Not just a drizzle, the kind of heavy, deafening downpour that makes the world feel like it's crumbling. I remember because Billie Eilish's voice was playing in the background when the parties overfloated softly from my headphones, almost mocking the moment. The irony of that lyric, the finality in her voice, the melancholy it matched perfectly with the way their words hit me. Like a quiet funeral for the child I thought I was. Asterisk, they didn't scream. That would have been easier, maybe. Instead, they said it like a sigh. Like a confession that had been heavy on their tongues for years, waiting to be exhaled. My mom had just sat down with a steaming cup of tea. My dad stood by the kitchen sink, drying a plate with a worn-out towel that had strawberries printed on it. That image is burned in my memory. I think it's because everything else in the moment was so surreal, and the strawberries were the only thing that felt absurdly normal. Asterisk, we never planned for you, she said, avoiding my eyes. You weren't supposed to happen. Asterisk, and then, silence. That brutal ice-cold silence. Asterisk, I didn't cry right away. I think my brain refused to accept what I'd heard. I kept listening to Billie, her voice swelling in my ears as if to drown out the meaning of what had just been said. But it was too late. The words had already burrowed into my skin like glass slivers, invisible but deeply painful. Asterisk, I remember, laughing, a weird broken laugh. I asked if they were joking. Dad looked up from the dish like I had interrupted his favorite show, annoyed more than anything else. You always took things too personally, he muttered. That's when I realized, this wasn't new to them. This wasn't a moment for them. It was just finally a relief to say it out loud. Asterisk, they didn't tell me out of rage, not out of guilt, just fatigue. Like I had been a weight they had carried for too long. And now they wanted to admit how tired they were. Asterisk, from that moment, everything felt different. Home wasn't home anymore. It became a waiting room I was trapped in, counting down the days until I could leave. Every smile they gave me after that felt artificial, every word laced with the knowledge that I was unwanted. I started paying attention to the details, how my mom always paused before calling my name, how my dad looked through me instead of at me. Maybe it had always been there and I just didn't want to see it. Asterisk, the worst part. I started to believe them. Asterisk, for weeks. I replayed the scene in my head. Their faces, their tone, that damn towel. I stayed up late with my headphones on, Billie's songs becoming the soundtrack of my unraveling. I Don't Want to Be You Anymore hit different when you believed your existence was a cosmic error. Asterisk, school didn't help. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? Hey, turns out I'm a parental accident. Cool, right? I stopped eating lunch with my friends, started skipping classes, walking aimlessly through back roads just to feel something different. Sometimes I'd sit on the cold ground under a tree behind the school gym and stare at the sky until my vision blurred. Asterisk, I wasn't suicidal, but I wasn't alive, either. Asterisk, and no one noticed. Not my teachers, not my classmates, and certainly not my parents. I became a shadow in my own life, a ghost haunting a girl who used to dream of being seen. They stopped asking me anything. They'd leave food on the table, sometimes not even that. I guess they assumed I'd feed myself if I really wanted to. Sometimes I did. Other times, I just didn't care. Asterisk, music became my only safe space. Billie Eilish felt like the only one who understood me. Like she had reached inside my chest and pulled out every quiet scream I was too scared to release. I memorized every lyric, every breath between verses, every soft crack in her voice. I started singing alone in my room, whispering the words to myself like prayers. Not for salvation, but for identity. If I wasn't wanted, maybe I could at least be someone else, someone that mattered to somebody. Then came my 16th birthday. No cake, no candles. Just a cold happy birthday tossed at me like trash as I passed my dad in the hallway. My mom didn't even look up from her phone. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, headphones on, volume full blast. Everything I wanted echoed through me, and for the first time, I let myself cry. Asterisk, not just a tear or two, I'm talking about the kind of cry that contorts your face and leaves you gasping, the kind that feels like you're coughing up pieces of your soul. I cried for the girl I used to be, for the love I never felt, for the twisted fate of being born into a home that resented my very breath. That night I made a decision. I was going to leave, not just emotionally, fitly. I didn't know how, or when, or where I'd go, but I knew I had to get out. If I stayed, I'd rot into the walls, disappear like forgotten wallpaper. I'd be another sad story no one bothered to read to the end. So I began planning. I started saving the little cash I had from birthday gifts over the years. Selling things online, doing small errands for neighbors under the radar. I researched shelters, job programs, anything that might take in a kid like me. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want pity, I wanted freedom. And the day came. 1 month after my 17th birthday, I walked out the door without a single word. No bags, just a hoodie, my phone, and $57 in my pocket. Billie was playing in my ears, "Bury a Friend." Fitting, really, because that's what I was doing. Burying every ounce of love I once had for them. Every memory, every hope. I never looked back. The streets didn't care that I had no plan. The city at night feels different when you're not going home, when there's no home at all. The lights look colder, the people blurrier. Every building feels like it's closing its doors, just as you approach. I walked aimlessly for hours, avoiding eye contact, clutching my phone like it held the last threads of my existence. The battery was low, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to call anyone, not them. I ended up sleeping behind a 24-hour laundromat that night. There was a vending machine inside, and with the last of my coins, I bought a pack of crackers and a bottled water. I sat there in the alley, knees pulled to my chest, Billie still in my ears. No Time to Die was playing. I closed my eyes and pretended I was in a music video, tragic, beautiful, forgotten. I was the girl who disappeared, and no one would notice. The days blurred after that. I bounced between shelters, fast food bathrooms, and the occasional park bench. I learned how to make myself small, how to sleep with one eye open, how to fake confidence when all I had inside was fear. Some nights were safer than others. Some people were kind, most weren't. I kept to myself, mouth shut, headphones in. My playlist was my only protection. There were moments, terrifying, soul-crushing moments, when I almost went back. When the cold was too much, or the hunger hollowed out my insides. But then I'd remember their faces. The indifference in their eyes. The words, "You weren't supposed to happen." And I'd bite down on my tongue until the pain anchored me back into my decision. Weeks passed. Then months. Eventually, I found a youth outreach center that offered more than just a bed. They had classes, counselors, and most importantly, music sessions. That first day I walked in, I didn't speak. I signed my name on a clipboard and took the cot in the back. The girl next to me had rainbow braids and tattoos on her knuckles. She didn't ask questions. That was the unspoken rule. We were all running from something, and none of us wanted to be chased. But the second week, something shifted. One of the staff members, Monica, heard me humming in the hallway. I didn't even know she was there. She stopped me and said, "That's Billie, right? Your voice sounds like a cloud trying not to cry." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever described me like that before. She smiled and handed me a flyer for the music group that met every Friday. I hesitated, then folded it into my pocket. That night, I reread it 100 times. I wanted to go, but I was scared. What if I wasn't good enough? What if they laughed? What if my voice cracked and everyone saw how broken I was? But something inside me, something raw and desperate, told me to try. That Friday, I showed up to the session. I kept my eyes low, sat in the corner. The room smelled like old wood and lavender. There were 6 other kids and a guy with a guitar. When they asked if anyone wanted to sing, I thought my heart might burst out of my chest. But when the room got quiet and all eyes drifted, I raised my hand. I sang Your Power. My voice trembled at first, but then it found itself. I don't know what it sounded like on the outside, but inside, it felt like exhaling pain I'd been storing for years. When I finished, the room was silent. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that means they heard me. Really heard me. That moment changed everything. Music became more than survival, it became my identity. I started writing my own songs, pouring every scar, every whispered memory into lyrics. Monica encouraged me, told me I had a gift. I didn't believe her at first, but each session, I grew a little bolder, a little stronger. I even sang at an open mic night once. I was shaking the whole time, but when I stepped off the stage, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of myself they had tried to erase. I never thought they'd reach out. Not after everything. But people talk, and the internet listens. Asterisk, one of my songs ended up on TikTok. I hadn't even posted it myself. A girl from the center recorded it and uploaded a clip. It went semi-viral. Not millions of views, but enough that my name started floating in the digital world. Enough that someone from my old school saw it, and that someone told someone else. And eventually, it found its way to my parents. Asterisk, I got the first message on a Wednesday night. A simple text from a number I hadn't saved. Asterisk, we saw your video. You're really talented. Can we talk? Asterisk, I stared at it for a long time. My stomach turned. My hands shook. I didn't reply. Asterisk, a few days later, an email arrived. Then a DM on Instagram. Then another text. Asterisk, we miss you. Asterisk, we're sorry. Asterisk, please come home. Home. That word made me nauseous. For months, they had ignored me, forgotten me. For years, they had tolerated me like a stain on their perfect life. And now, after one viral video, I was suddenly worth something. Asterisk, I wanted to scream, to throw my phone into the ocean. But I didn't. I let the messages pile up. I read every word, dissected every sentence. They used phrases like we've changed and we made mistakes. They said they were proud. They said they never stopped loving me. But I remembered everything. I remembered the rain. The strawberry towel. The emptiness in their voices when they said I was a mistake. And suddenly, their apologies felt like counterfeit bells, useless and insulting. Asterisk, they didn't want me. They wanted the version of me that other people admired. The girl with the sad voice and soulful eyes. The survivor. The artist. But that girl didn't exist without the wreckage. Without the abandonment. Without their cruelty. Asterisk, so I didn't answer. Not for a long time. Until the package came. Asterisk, it was a Thursday morning, and the staff called my name. Said there was something at the front desk for me. I didn't think much of it. Probably a donation mix-up or the wrong mail. But when I saw the box, my heart stopped. Asterisk, my name. My full name. Written in my mother's handwriting. Asterisk, I didn't open it right away. I carried it back to my cot and stared at it like it might explode. It wasn't heavy, but it felt weighted. Like it carried more than just items, like it carried intentions. Regrets. Asterisk, when I finally opened it, I found a letter. On top, folded neatly, written in black ink, and under it, money. Asterisk, bundles, stacks, $52,000. The weight of the envelope hit me first in but unnervingly heavy. $52,000. I counted it twice. Stacks of $100 bills, bundled so neatly I almost didn't believe it was real. My fingers trembled, hovering over the note. The letter was brief, but every word burned. We know we hurt you. We can't take back the past, but we want to try to make it right. Please come home. We love you. Asterisk, I sat there, my breath hitching. Love, such a strange word coming from them. After everything they'd said and done, I wasn't sure if love was even in their vocabulary anymore. It felt like a mask they wore now, one they wanted me to believe was real. But beneath it, I could still hear the echoes of their silence. The cold that had seeped into my bones for years. Asterisk, the money made it worse. Was it a bribe, an apology wrapped in green paper? Or maybe a test? To see if I could be bought after all this pain. Asterisk, I wanted to burn it. Rip the letter to shreds. Throw the bills into the nearest river and watch them sink, but I didn't. Something inside me, a tiny, fragile piece, wanted to believe. Wanted to imagine that maybe, just maybe, this was a start. Asterisk, I called Monica. She listened without judgment as I held the phone tight and let the floodgate open. I told her about the box, the letter, the past. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. She just said, you don't owe them anything, but you owe yourself the truth. Truth. What was my truth? Asterisk, I was a girl who had been told she was a mistake, who had run away and almost disappeared, a girl who had built a life from scraps of songs and broken dreams. But I was also a girl who still longed for family, for belonging, even if that longing felt like a trap. Asterisk, days passed. The messages kept coming, more heartfelt, more desperate. They asked if I'd meet them. They promised therapy, change, a fresh start. I wanted to scream, where were you before? But I kept silent. Asterisk, one afternoon, I made a decision. I wouldn't go back blind. I wouldn't let myself fall for promises again. I would meet them on my terms. I arranged a neutral place, a quiet cafe far from the ghosts of my childhood home. Asterisk, the day arrived, and my stomach churned like a storm. I put on the jacket I'd bought with some of the money, tightened the scarf around my neck, and stepped into the biting wind. Billie's Lovely hummed through my headphones, steadying me. The world outside blurred, and I focused on each step. On breathing. When I saw them sitting at the corner table, I almost turned around. My parents looked older. Worn down by guilt, by regret. They weren't the people who had told me I was a mistake. But the shadows of those people lingered in their eyes. My mom stood first. Her voice cracked when she said, "We're sorry." Dad nodded, swallowing words I could feel but never hear. I sat down, the chair creaking under me. It felt like the first time in years someone noticed my presence without dismissing it. I told them what it felt like, how their words had shattered me, how their silence had abandoned me. I spoke of the nights in shelters, the cold, the hunger, the fear. They listened. Real tears rolled down my mother's cheeks, and my father's hands shook. For once, the apology wasn't just words. It was agony. But I told them the truth they needed to hear. Rai wasn't the same girl who left. I had built myself from ashes, and the money couldn't buy back lost years. I needed more than apologies. I needed proof. They promised therapy, family sessions. Time. That day was a beginning, not an ending. Walking away from that cafe, Billie's Everything I Wanted played softly in my ears again. This time, I didn't cry. I breathed in the cold air and felt the tentative pulse of hope. Hope isn't forgetting, it's choosing to keep going, even when the past wants to hold you down. After that day at the cafe, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. The path behind me was littered with broken dreams and shattered trust. The one ahead was uncharted, frightening, and fragile, but it was mine to choose. I decided to give them a chance, not because I was naive, but because I was tired of running and hiding. I wanted to reclaim a piece of what I had lost, even if it meant walking back into the storm. The first family therapy session was a battlefield cloaked in polite words and cautious silences. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Reynolds, had a way of asking questions that dug deep beneath our carefully constructed facades. My parents talked about guilt and regret, their voices trembling, but I saw through the cracks. Their apologies were genuine. But the years of neglect couldn't be erased overnight. I listened to them speak and thought about the years I spent imagining what love looked like. Not the fairy tale love from books, but the simple, everyday love, the kind that lets you know you belong somewhere. I realized I had spent so long protecting myself from pain that I forgot how to let anyone in. My defenses were strong walls built with bricks of anger, fear, and loneliness. In those sessions, I began to crack. I admitted things I'd buried for so long. The nights I cried myself to sleep, the hunger that gnawed at my belly, the endless replaying of their words in my mind. And with every confession, the weight inside me lifted a little. But the journey wasn't linear. Some days, the old wounds reopened like fresh cuts. I'd find myself spiraling back to the memories of being told I was a mistake, words that echoed louder than any promise. My parents tried, but sometimes their efforts felt like grasping at shadows. I wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible. One afternoon, after a particularly tense session, I left the clinic and wandered into a nearby park. The trees were heavy with spring blossoms, the air thick with the scent of renewal. I sat on a bench and pulled out my notebook, the one I always carried. I wrote without stopping, the ink bleeding my pain and hope onto the pages. Music had always been my refuge, but writing was becoming my way of making sense of the chaos. I wrote about loneliness, about scars, about the girl who had been silenced for too long. Each word was a brick in the bridge I was building between who I was and who I wanted to become. My songs started changing. Too, they weren't just about pain anymore, they were about resilience, about fighting to be seen and heard. I posted some of them online, and to my surprise, people responded. Strangers who had felt lost or broken sent messages of encouragement. Their words became lifelines, reminders that I wasn't alone. Meanwhile, my parents were learning to. Therapy showed them the damage their silence had caused. They admitted their mistakes not just in words, but in actions, showing up when it mattered, listening without judgment, trying to rebuild trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, tears, moments when I wanted to retreat back into my shell. But each time, I reminded myself that healing was messy and slow. It didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be real. One night, I was home, really home. Not just a place to crash, and I found my mom crying quietly in the kitchen. She looked up when I entered, eyes red and tired. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Scared that I lost you forever." Asterisk, I sat beside her, reaching out. "You didn't lose me. I'm still here. And I want us to try." Asterisk, that moment, fragile and raw, was a turning point. It showed me that beneath their flaws, my parents were human, too flawed, scared, trying to fix what they broke. Asterisk, over the next months, my life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I finished high school with the help of tutors from the outreach center, worked part-time jobs, and kept writing songs that poured out my journey. I even started performing again, tentatively stepping back into the spotlight. Asterisk, people began calling me the girl who survived, but I hated that label. I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting, growing, living. I was becoming someone my younger self could be proud of. Asterisk, and then, one evening, something happened that changed everything again. Asterisk, I was backstage at a small venue, waiting to perform, when someone approached me with a familiar face. It was a local music producer who had seen my videos online. He said he believed in my voice, in my story, and wanted to help me record an album. Asterisk, I was stunned. The dream I'd thought was lost in the wreckage of my childhood was starting to come alive. Asterisk, but with opportunity came fear, the fear that my parents' shadows would follow me forever, that the pain would haunt my success. I realized I needed to confront that fear head-on. Asterisk, so I did something I never thought I could. I invited my parents to my first big show. Asterisk, they hesitated, unsure if they were ready, but they came. Sitting in the front row, watching me sing the songs I'd written from the depths of my soul. Tears streaming down their faces. I saw the beginning of a new chapter. Asterisk, their hands clapped, slowly at first, then louder. For the first time in years, I felt their pride, not forced, not fake, but real. Asterisk, as I stepped off the stage that night, the applause ringing in my ears, I knew the road ahead would still have bumps, but I was no longer a mistake. I was a story, my own story, written in scars, in music, and in hope. The applause from that night still echoed in my mind long after the lights went down. For years, I had craved validation, a sign that I mattered beyond the weight of being labeled a mistake. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers who cheered for the girl I had become, I tasted something I hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance. Not from them, my parents, but from the world. Asterisk, still, the journey back to my family was far from easy. After that concert, the fragile bond we had started to build was tested again and again. Old wounds flared unexpectedly, and sometimes I found myself retreating into the safety of solitude. My parents tried, but years of neglect had left scars that words couldn't quickly heal. The money they sent, the apologies they made, none of it replaced the years I had spent feeling invisible. Asterisk, I learned that forgiveness is not a destination but a process, a long, winding road with setbacks and breakthroughs. There were nights I questioned whether I was strong enough to keep walking it. The temptation to close myself off and shut them out forever whispered constantly in my ear. Asterisk, but each time doubt crept in, I found strength in my music. The lyrics I wrote became a mirror to my soul, reflecting my pain, my anger, my hope. Writing and singing were no longer escapes. They were tools of survival and growth. I shared my songs online, and slowly, a community formed. People from all walks of life reached out with stories of their own broken families, their own battles with rejection. Their words reminded me I wasn't alone, and that my story could be a beacon for others lost in darkness. Asterisk, in time, I agreed to attend more family sessions. The therapist guided us through difficult conversations, forcing us to face truths we had avoided for years. My parents spoke candidly about their regrets and fears, revealing vulnerabilities that surprised me. They admitted how scared they had been of failing me and how their own pain had led to coldness and distance. Asterisk, one afternoon, during a session, my mom broke down completely. "I was so scared to lose you," she whispered through tears. "I didn't know how to show love the right way. I see now how much I hurt you, and I'm sorry." Asterisk, hearing those words wasn't an instant cure, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of silence and pain that had separated us. For the first time, I saw their humanity not as an excuse for the past, but as a foundation for a possible future. Asterisk, outside therapy, we began rebuilding everyday routines, small moments, sharing meals, watching TV, talking about music, the glue holding us together. My parents started asking about my dreams and plans, showing genuine interest rather than obligation. I cautiously let them in, still guarding the parts of me that were fragile. Meanwhile, my music career slowly grew. I recorded my first EP with the producer who had found me, pouring raw emotion into each track. The release was modest but meaningful, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Fans told me how my songs helped them through their darkest times, and I realized my pain had transformed into something powerful and healing. But with success came challenges. The spotlight brought scrutiny, and sometimes the old feelings of inadequacy crept back. I struggled with balancing my personal growth with the expectations of others. Was I the broken girl forever, or the survivor? Could I be both? Through it all, Billie's music remained my anchor. Her voice, once a lifeline in my loneliness, now felt like a companion on my journey towards self-love and acceptance. One evening, after a show, I sat alone backstage, reflecting on how far I had come. The girl who was once told she was a mistake, now stood tall, singing her truth for the world to hear. Tears streamed down my face, not of sorrow, but of pride and release. I texted my parents. "Thank you for trying. I'm still healing, but I love you." Their reply came quickly. "We love you too. Always." It wasn't perfect. We still had work to do, but we were no longer strangers living under the same roof. We were a family, imperfect, fragile, but real. And as I closed my eyes that night, Billie's soft voice hummed through my mind. "You should see me in a crown." Maybe someday, I would. The days after that text felt lighter, as if the weight of unspoken words between us had finally lifted a little. I started waking up with a fragile sense of hope instead of dread. Healing was slow, like a river carving through stone, patient, relentless, imperfect, but it was happening. School was over, and I was working 2 part-time jobs to save money for college. Every shift was exhausting, but it gave me a sense of control I'd never had before. I was finally building a life on my own terms, not defined by the mistakes of my past. My parents tried to be part of it. My mom called more often, asking about my day. My dad sent me articles about music and self-care, little nudges that said, "I'm here." We shared family dinners, some awkward, others warm. Slowly, the house began to feel like home again. One evening, after dinner, my dad pulled out an old photo album. We sat on the couch, flipping through pictures of me as a baby, laughing at moments I barely remembered. For the first time, he shared stories about their fears when I was born. Pressure, the unexpectedness, the love tangled with confusion. Listening to him, I realized that their mistakes weren't just cold neglect, but a tangled mess of human fear and imperfection. It didn't excuse their behavior, but it made me see them in a new light as flawed people trying to do better. In the months that followed, I dove deeper into music. I wrote songs about forgiveness, about finding strength in vulnerability. The album took shape. Each track a chapter of my journey from pain and rejection to healing and hope. The night of my album release show was surreal. The venue was packed with friends from the outreach center, fans from online, even a few family members who had supported me quietly from the sidelines. My parents sat in the front row, hands trembling, eyes shining with pride. When I stepped on stage, I felt a surge of emotion. The girl who was once silenced by her parents' words was now standing tall, singing her truth for all to hear. The crowd sang along, their voices lifting me higher than I ever imagined. After the show, my mom hugged me tightly. "You're stronger than I ever knew," she whispered. My dad nodded, eyes misty. "We're proud of you." I smiled through tears, knowing the road ahead would still be challenging, but also knowing I wasn't alone anymore. The journey from being told I was a mistake to becoming a woman who reclaimed her voice wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and beautiful all at once. I learned that family isn't perfect, it's a choice. A constant effort to see, to forgive, and to love despite the scars. Billie's music, once a soundtrack of my loneliness, became a hymn of my survival, and now, when I listen to her, I hear not just sorrow but strength. I'm no longer defined by their words. I'm defined by the woman I've chosen to become. The morning after my album release, I woke up feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. It was like I'd just climbed a mountain and stood on the peak, gasping for air but thrilled by the view. The journey had been long and winding, but here I was, alive and singing louder than ever. Asterisk, I checked my phone and saw hundreds of messages, friends, fans, even strangers thanking me for sharing my story. Their words filled the cracks in my heart I never knew existed. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about connection, healing, and truth. Asterisk, but even with the high, there were shadows. The scars from my past didn't disappear with applause. Some nights, when the house was silent, I'd feel the old ache, the feeling of being unwanted, of being a mistake. It whispered to me, trying to pull me back into the dark. Asterisk, one night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat by my window and watched the city lights flicker. Billie's voice played softly in the background. When the party's over, the lyrics hit me harder than ever. I realized healing wasn't about erasing pain, it was about learning to live with it, to carry it without letting it weigh me down. Asterisk, I reached for my journal and began to write not songs this time, but letters, to my younger self, letters filled with love, encouragement, and the truth I wished I'd known. You are worthy, you are seen, you are enough. Asterisk, writing became a ritual, a way to confront my fears and remind myself of how far I'd come. I sent one of those letters to Monica, the counselor who had held my hand through the darkest times. She told me she was proud, and that my words could help others find their way. Asterisk, inspired. I started a blog, sharing pieces of my journey in hopes of reaching others who felt broken and lost. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from teens and adults alike, many echoing the same feelings I'd battled: rejection, loneliness, the desperate need to be loved. Asterisk, through it all, my parents stayed by my side, imperfect but present. We attended more family therapy, navigated difficult conversations, and celebrated small victories. The love between us wasn't perfect, it was messy and real, and I learned that sometimes, love means showing up even when it's hard. Asterisk, one afternoon, as we sat in the park laughing about silly childhood memories, my mom turned to me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." Asterisk, I smiled, feeling the weight of those words. I hadn't given up, not on them, and not on myself. Asterisk, music continued to be my refuge and my voice. I began collaborating with other artists, pouring my story into melodies that resonated far beyond my small world. Each performance was a reminder that my past didn't define me, it fueled me. Asterisk, and through it all, Billie's songs remained my compass. Her voice had once been a lifeline in my darkest days, and now it was a celebration of survival. Asterisk, one evening, as I stood backstage preparing for another show, I closed my eyes and whispered, "This is for the girl who was told she was a mistake." Asterisk, the lights dimmed, the crowd roared, and I stepped into the spotlight, no longer broken, but whole. The spotlight was warm and blinding all at once, but it was familiar, now the kind of light I had craved for so long. That night, as I sang, I wasn't just performing songs. I was telling a story written in pain and hope, in silence and screams. Every note was a bridge connecting my past to my future. Asterisk, the crowd's faces blurred into a sea of light, but their energy grounded me. For once, I felt seen, not as a mistake, not as a shadow, but as someone worthy of love and attention. The applause after the final song was deafening, but inside, I felt a calm I'd never known before. Asterisk, after the show, my parents waited for me backstage. Their eyes shone with pride and something new, vulnerability. We hugged tightly, and for a moment, the past didn't exist. There was only this fragile, beautiful present. Asterisk, in the weeks that followed, things settled into a rhythm. I balanced college applications, part-time work, and writing new music. My relationship with my parents grew slowly but surely. We still stumbled, but each misstep was met with a little more understanding. Asterisk, one afternoon, my mom surprised me with an old box she'd found while cleaning. Inside were letters they'd written during the years I was gone, letters they'd never sent. Apologies, memories, hopes for the future. Reading them was bittersweet. I saw their pain, their regrets, but also a genuine desire to heal. Asterisk, I realized that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. About choosing love despite the scars. Asterisk, my music continued to evolve. I started blending my story with universal themes: loss, resilience, identity. Fans connected deeply, and my following grew. Each song was a conversation, a way to reach others struggling with their own battles. Asterisk, one night, after a radio interview, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She thanked me for my honesty, for giving her hope when she felt invisible. In that moment, I understood the power of my story, not just as a healing for myself, but as a beacon for others. Despite the progress, shadows from the past sometimes resurfaced. I'd wake from nightmares, hear voices of doubt, whispering I wasn't enough, but each time, I fought back with the armor I'd built: music, therapy, community, and self-love. Billie Eilish's music remained a constant companion. Her voice had been the soundtrack to my darkest nights and now underscored my victories. She taught me that it's okay to be vulnerable, to embrace darkness and light. Looking back, I saw how far I'd come from the girl told she was a mistake, hiding behind headphones and tears, to the woman standing tall on stage, telling her truth. The journey wasn't over, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready to write the next chapter, one filled with love, forgiveness, and hope. The mornings grew quieter as summer crept in, but inside me, the noise never stopped. I was still that girl from years ago, the one who feared she wasn't enough, but now, I was learning to tame those fears instead of running from them. Healing was not a straight path. Some days were filled with light, others dragged me back into shadows I thought I'd left behind. But each moment was a lesson in resilience. College applications consumed me, an intimidating world full of possibilities and anxieties. I found solace in late-night writing sessions, pouring my thoughts into lyrics that felt like therapy. The words spilled out confessions of hurt, of hope, of growing up too fast. I shared those songs on social media, and they resonated far beyond what I imagined. Messages flooded in from people who found fragments of their own pain and courage in my voice. My parents became quieter supporters. They came to see my small performances, sometimes sitting side by side in the back row, their presence a silent apology and a promise. I saw my mom's hands tremble when she clapped, and my dad's proud smile as he watched me command the stage. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my dad shared stories about his own childhood stories filled with struggles and mistakes. I realized then that pain is a cycle, handed down unknowingly from one generation to the next. But I refused to let it define me. I was determined to break the chain. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window listening to Billie's Hostage. The lyrics mirrored my own tangled emotions, the fear of losing control, the longing to be free. I wrote a new song that night, a declaration of independence and self-love. The next morning, I sent the demo to Monica. She called me back with tears in her voice, telling me it was the most powerful thing she'd heard. Her words fueled my confidence, and I knew I was ready to take the next step. I reached out to a well-known producer in the city, hoping to collaborate on a full-length album. To my surprise, he responded immediately, praising my raw talent and emotional depth. We met the following week, and from that day, my music career took a leap forward. Balancing school, work, therapy, and music wasn't easy. There were nights I felt like giving up, when the weight of expectations and old wounds pressed too hard. But every time I faltered, I reminded myself why I started to reclaim my voice. To rewrite my story, my relationship with my parents deepened. Slowly, we began attending a weekly support group for families healing from trauma. Hearing others' stories helped us understand each other better and opened doors for forgiveness. One rainy afternoon, I found myself crying in my room, overwhelmed by the progress and the pain. My mom knocked softly and entered, sitting beside me. She didn't say much, just held my hand. In that silence, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years, a fragile, hopeful connection. The months rolled on, and I released my debut album. It was a mosaic of heartbreak, resilience, and hope. Critics praised its honesty, and fans shared how it helped them through their own struggles. Standing on stage during the album launch, I saw my parents in the crowd. Their eyes glistened with tears, and I knew we were healing together, step by step. I was no longer the mistake they once claimed I was. I was the voice of survival, a woman who chose love over pain, truth over silence. The first time I heard my song on the radio, I was sitting alone in a taxi, heading home from a studio session that had run late into the night. The sky was ink black, the kind of dark that swallows everything except the dull glow of traffic, lights, and distant buildings. The cab driver was humming along to the station when I heard the opening chords. My chords. My voice followed seconds later, soft and trembling, but unmistakably mine. I froze. It was a strange kind of stillness. Not disbelief, not even joy, right away just awe. Like the universe had paused for a breath. The driver turned the volume up a bit and said, "She sounds like she's been through some things, huh?" Asterisk, I smiled, blinking back tears. "Yeah," I whispered. "She has." Asterisk, hearing myself like that, unannounced, surrounded by the quiet hum of a stranger's life, it made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. I'd always written my songs like confessions. I never imagined they'd become someone's soundtrack, the way Billie's music had once been mine. But there I was, bleeding through the speakers of a cab, becoming part of someone else's story without them even knowing mine. Asterisk, when I got home, I didn't tell my parents. I wanted to hold that moment close, like a secret gem in my pocket, but the next morning, my mom found me in the kitchen, clutching a mug, smiling at nothing. Asterisk, you heard it, didn't you? She asked. Asterisk, I didn't need to say yes. She just nodded, eyes soft, then reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. That simple gesture undid me. It wasn't grand or rehearsed, it was natural, maternal, tender. I hadn't felt that kind of closeness since I was a child. Long before the silence, before the wound opened between us, asterisk, I leaned into her without thinking, resting my head on her shoulder like I used to. She wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. We stood like that for a while, breathing, healing. But healing is a slow, non-linear climb. For every step forward, there were stumbles back. Sometimes I still caught myself watching my parents too closely, searching their faces for signs of old patterns, for traces of the coldness I knew too well. I hated that part of me, the one that expected abandonment at any moment. But trauma doesn't loosen its grip easily. It whispers in moments of stillness, doubts in moments of peace. Asterisk, and yet, I kept going. Asterisk's college acceptance letters arrived. I got into 3, but one stood out, a music conservatory on the coast that offered me a partial scholarship. The idea of leaving scared me, not because of the distance, but because of what it would mean, the final step in growing up, in fully detaching from the version of myself that was built in reaction to pain. Asterisk, my parents supported me, though their faces betrayed sadness. My dad helped me pack. My mom made lists and bought me essentials I didn't even think I needed. On the day of my departure, we stood in the driveway for a long time, not saying much. Asterisk, my mom hugged me first. "You are not a mistake," she said, voice trembling. "You never were. I just didn't know how to be a mother back then." Asterisk, I know, I whispered. I didn't know how to be a daughter, either. Asterisk, then my dad, stoic, quiet, pulled me into his arms and simply said, "Make music they'll never forget." Asterisk, at school, everything felt new, terrifying, exhilarating, open. I met people who had never heard my story, who didn't know my pain. At first, I felt unmoored, like a balloon with its string cut. But soon, I realized there was power in reinventing myself, not by hiding my past, but by choosing how it defined me. Asterisk, my dorm was small but bright, filled with sun during the day and the soft hum of instruments at night. I made friends slowly, cautiously, letting people in on my terms. I found a second home in the practice rooms, losing hours at a time, composing, recording, exploring sounds that felt like chapters of the book I was still writing. Asterisk, and still, Billie was there. Asterisk, her songs played softly through my headphones as I walked to class, her voice reminding me that pain could coexist with beauty, that truth could be soft and sharp all at once. I felt like she'd walked the same edge I had, that her art had given me permission to create something from my chaos. Asterisk, midway through the semester, I was invited to open for a major local artist at a festival. It was the biggest crowd I'd ever faced, and the fear clawed at my throat like it did when I first stepped on stage back in that shelter all those years ago. But I remembered that girl. The one who left home with nothing but headphones and $57. The one who cried under streetlights, who whispered lyrics like prayers. Asterisk, she didn't die. She became me. Asterisk, that night, I stepped into the spotlight and told my story not with words, but with music. I sang not just for the crowd, not even for my parents, but for the version of myself who thought she'd never be more than a mistake. I was more. After the set, someone slipped me a note backstage. It read, asterisk, your voice saved me. Thank you for surviving. Asterisk, I stared at that note for a long time. It reminded me that survival wasn't just about living, it was about becoming. And I had become something I never thought possible. A source of light. Asterisk, later that week, I called my parents. We talked for hours. About classes, songs, what they'd been cooking. My mom sent me a photo of my childhood bedroom: new curtains, fresh paint, a vase of wildflowers by the window. Asterisk, I wanted it to feel like it was yours again, she said. Asterisk, it is, I replied, but I think I found another home, too. And I had. The world no longer felt like something I had to run from or fight against. It felt open, complicated, yes, but full of potential. My pain hadn't vanished, but it didn't define me anymore. It was a thread in the tapestry, not the whole picture. Asterisk, and for the first time, when I listened to Everything I Wanted, I didn't cry. Asterisk, I smiled. The first night of the tour arrived faster than I could process. One moment I was rehearsing in a dusty studio with my producer counting measures and reminding me to breathe. And the next I was backstage at a venue 3 times bigger than anything I had ever played, my name printed across a glowing marquee. There were hundreds of people out there, strangers who had shown up not just for music, but for me. Not because they pitied me, not because of my story, but because they'd found pieces of themselves in the songs I had once written in the shadows of my fear. Asterisk, I stood backstage, heart pounding, and pressed my palm against my chest like I could calm it just by touch. I closed my eyes, whispering to the girl I used to be, the one who first escaped her house with Billie Eilish echoing in her ears. We're here, I told her. We made it. Asterisk, the lights dimmed. My name was announced. I stepped onto the stage. Asterisk, it was a blur at first: light, sound, the hush of anticipation, the swell of applause. But then I saw them. My parents, they were in the second row, side by side. My dad was holding my mom's hand. I couldn't see their faces clearly under the lights, but I could feel them there, grounded and present. They had driven across 2 states to be at the first show. No grand announcement, no demands, just showing up. Asterisk, that night, I didn't perform. I told the truth through melody. Asterisk, I opened with Uninvited Birth, the song I had once been too afraid to sing out loud. It was the story of being told I was never wanted, of growing up in silence, of screaming without sound. But when the final note faded, the silence wasn't heavy. It was reverent. People clapped like they were clapping for themselves too. After the show, I met fans. They hugged me like old friends. They shared pieces of their pain, stories of estrangement, rejection, survival. One girl, no older than 14, handed me a crumpled drawing of me on stage, surrounded by tiny words, "Not a mistake." I held back tears, hugged her tight, and whispered, "Neither are you." Asterisk, the tour stretched on, city after city, stage after stage. Some nights were electric, others quiet and aching, but through it all, I kept writing. Hotels became my notebooks. Long van rides turned into thinking spaces. My voice grew stronger, not just technically, but emotionally. I began to sing without apology. Asterisk, midway through the tour, something unexpected happened. Billie Eilish's team reached out. I almost dropped my phone when I read the message. They had heard one of my live performances on a local radio stream and were moved by the story behind my music. There was no promise of a collaboration, no glamorous contract, just an invitation. A private showcase in LA, where new voices with strong messages could perform for a curated audience of musicians and producers. Asterisk, my hands shook as I read it again. It felt surreal. Asterisk, I called Monica. I could hear the pride in her voice when she said, "Of course, they found you. You're one of them now." Asterisk, preparing for that night was the most nerve-wracking thing I'd ever done. But when I arrived, guitar in hand, and saw the small circle of folding chairs, the stripped-down stage, and Billie herself sitting quietly in the back, something inside me settled. Asterisk, I sang one song, "Mistake," rewritten, a song I hadn't shared publicly yet. It wasn't about blame. It wasn't about anger. It was a story of transformation, about becoming, about surviving, about rising. Asterisk, the room was quiet when I finished. Then Billie stood up and clapped. Asterisk, I can still remember what she said when she came to speak to me afterward. She didn't flatter me or offer some rehearsed speech. Asterisk, she just looked me in the eyes and said, "That felt real, and painful, and brave. Keep telling it like that." It was enough. No promises of fame. No glittering contract. Just recognition from the very voice who had once held my broken pieces together. Asterisk. The final leg of the tour took me home. Literally. Asterisk, the venue was 30 minutes from where I grew up. It was the first time I'd be that close to my old neighborhood since everything had happened. I hadn't planned on visiting the house, But something pulled me there. My parents drove me. We didn't say much on the way. The streets felt narrower than I remembered, the trees taller. Or maybe I was just seeing them with different eyes. When we pulled into the old driveway, the house looked the same and entirely different. I stepped out first. I walked up to the door and knocked, even though I knew no one lived there now. The new owners had painted it a soft yellow, and there was a swing on the porch. I stood there for a moment, not needing to go inside. Just needing to feel the air, to stand in the same place where I'd once learned what silence could do to a child. And then I let it go. Not all at once. Not like in the movies. But slowly. Breath by breath. I turned back to my parents, and they were both crying. My mom reached for me, and I let her. She rested her head against mine, and whispered, "Thank you for not turning away when we deserved it." And I said, "Thank you for trying when it would have been easier not to." That final show felt like a homecoming. Not to a place, but to myself. I played every song like it was a confession. I let the crowd see every corner of me, the anger, the fear, the softness I'd fought so hard to protect. When the last note of the last song rang out, I didn't say goodbye. I just whispered, "I'm here," and walked off stage. The next morning. I sat in my childhood bedroom, rebuilt, repainted, reimagined, and wrote a letter. To myself. To the girl who ran, to the woman who returned. It read, "You were never a mistake. You were a moment of defiance against a world that didn't know how to love you yet. You survived. You sang, and in doing so, you saved more than just yourself." I folded it, placed it in the journal I started at 16, and slid it onto the bookshelf. Not to forget, but to remember. Because now, when I hear Billie sing, it's not a cry for help anymore. It's a harmony.